Hello, everyone. Welcome to Marijuana Monthlies. This is October 2022. I'm your host, Chelsea Higgs Wise, and also the Executive Director of Marijuana Justice. Thank you so much for joining us again. Here's a reminder that every month we have these conversations, so make sure that you visit some of our conversations from the previous months. We have speakers from all over the nation coming to talk about their great work in decriminalization and legalization and overall equity and freedom. So I'm here to welcome you to this space because we do believe that we keep us safe and we're here to build a gateway to dismantling the drug war and legalizing cannabis and marijuana. Our goal is to repeal the prohibition, repair our communities, and bring reparations by reinvesting the revenues from adult use back into the communities that have been hit the hardest by the drug war. We are here to also remind everyone right here in the Virginia Commonwealth that there are almost 600 people still incarcerated in Virginia prisons due to marijuana offenses, not to mention the people that are still caged in jails and under community and under community surveillance because they are still being watched and have to report due to marijuana offenses. There are no major updates except that, hey, y'all, the hemp task force is still meeting and they are set to have their report back to the legislators by the end of November to recommend anything for regulation with hemp as well as adult use THC in this upcoming session, January 2022. Now, I will say that a lot of the conversations have been centered on edibles and the safety of edibles. And sounds like a little bit of drug war, fear mongering around what can happen with edibles. And honestly, this is why many people talk about safe regulation because of the safety measures that can be really taken seriously and any risk that can be avoided with proper regulation. So there are no other real updates on what's going on. Please continue to make sure that you are subscribed to our website and our weekly email that comes out with all of the excerpts and all of the updates that's going on. And we also try to make sure that any of the dopest articles that are coming out from all across the states and industries are also included in that weekly update. So I'm excited today that we get to bring someone I've been following now for over a year and still learning from in her work. So thankful for Rosalie Flores for joining us today. I'm going to come on and bring Rosalie on the stage. The majority of her work is in Colorado and New Mexico and is centered around the reparative and environmental justice realms. She's the co-founder of Expunge Colorado, the only nonprofit in the state that provides education and access to pro bono legal services for the purposes of sealing eligible criminal records. And in 2021, Rosalie helped launch the New Mexico Cannabis Justice Project and help amplify community concerns regarding the lack of equity in water protections and legalization of adult use cannabis. I'm so excited to have you here, Rosalie. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, Chelsea. I love what you're doing, and I'm proud to be part of your Justice League.
Well, I'm excited for folks to hear what you are up to. Is there anything else that I didn't mention that you just want to let the listeners and followers know about you, and just tell us a little bit of how you got into this cannabis work?
Sure. Excuse me. I'm a drug war survivor. I'm gonna start with that. I guess that's how getting in this game. Uh, I'm proud and glad to say that I survived the streets of the drug war. It was wild growing up in the '90s in New Mexico, peak of the drug war, the crime bills, all of this stuff. And so I was really excited to get in the legal cannabis space when Colorado passed the bill and said I'm going to move there and I'm going to get in this game. And was just floored first week. I was like, what's going on here? I don't know what's going on in this industry, and I couldn't understand. But yeah, I got into the space to really just be able to do something that our people have done, for millennia, and not be criminalized for it.
Mhm.
So
You, you mentioned you and your folks. Who are your folks? Who are your people?
yeah, well, I'm a native New Mexican. I'm a Chicana, Genizara, Hispana. My family's been in New Mexico for as long as we remember. We don't have any other history. we're part of the Spanish land grants, and Enizaros are detribalized Native Americans that were indentured servants for those Hispano settlers. So I'm both the colonized and the colonizer, and there's definite struggle within that. And I think there's a lot of healing that needs to take place within New Mexico because of it. But it makes our people so unique. That's such a beautiful blend. Yet, unfortunately, being a minority majority state, it has, I consider New Mexico been hit the hardest by the drug war. It's still one of the most impoverished. It is the worst in education. The crime is off the charts. Alcohol and addiction is surpasses deaths way surpass other states. And so it's a state that I think really, really should be looked at and really should be investigated as we continue to say these claims that we're going to repair these harms. Well, if a state like New Mexico that's been hit the hardest by this drug war is not benefiting, then what's going on? What's wrong? And so that's been the focus of what I've been thinking about lately. How we really have to learn from past experiences, other states, and make sure we're doing it right.
Right. And thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your background, but also the landscape of New Mexico and Albuquerque and just the different groups that are there and that represent the state right now. I think coming from the East Coast and, Black Southerners specifically that information may be really new when we talk about cannabis legalization, when we talk about equity. Right. These are the examples of reminding us that equity looks very different for each locality, but very much the same in the way that it should come from the folks there. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so you told us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and you said that when you heard about this business and what was happening in Colorado, you moved up there because you were drawn to that and wanted to help.
Yeah, and my first couple years in the space really kind of solidified why and why I want to do this work. My first employer was a cannabis manufacturer, a bunch of white men, and they were extremely patronizing. One of them never got my name right for the year that I worked for him. He called me Maria. The other one would I'd bring up a question or concern or have something, and it would Rosalie, and it was, I started to cringe every time I would have to call and talk and check in. I was paid well, but I was not respected. And it was very evident right away. So I quit that job, decided to work for myself and said, this is not, I can't do this. Contracted with another manufacturer because I have extensive sales and marketing experience from my past, and was paid about 3 times less than a white woman with less sales and cannabis experience. But she had banking experience, and she had the talk, and she had I was like, I'm going to prove myself. I'm going to prove myself. I'm going to, they're going to see how great I am without ever really valuing my own work at the front, the same way that this woman did. She said, I need 3 times as much. And that was really frustrating. And then I kept on, and I decided to work then for a cannabis company as their director of equity. And that was super, super cool experience because I got to train a group of equity applicants on everything I knew essentially, and got to learn a heck of a lot more along the way and create this whole program. But there was zero budget for equity, and there was zero encouragement to talk about equity outside of this program and in a bigger context of policy and legislation in other states. And so I had to quit that job as well. And so at that point, I'm like, this is wild. And I've been on all pieces of it. During all of that time, I had worked for MCBA as a membership coordinator. I volunteered a number of times. I was a free consultant for the city of Denver on some expungement programs. I really just, I gave myself a lot for this, and it cost a lot. It took a lot. And that's something that I think, advocates have to just, I don't want to say accept whatsoever, but have to change. I think that's probably the right word. Yeah. That we can't be giving our time and sacrificing our day jobs and our lives to give free consultation for governments and agencies that are getting paid by our opposition, essentially. So that's been a little bit of my experience in the past 6 years in this cannabis space. It's not been great, but I'm still here, and there's there's a lot to be said about those experiences and about, the more I learn about the disclosure of impacted communities in legislation and about,
Yeah.
there's not listening sessions, there's not education, there's not a whole lot. So yeah, that's why I keep doing what I do, because it's just it's not fair, it's unjust.
Rosalie, and that is really why we really like to ask the question of like, how did you get here? What was your journey? Because for a lot of us, particularly that are focused in equity, it sounds a lot the same. Of we saw a gap, we were working in environments that were not focused on equity, and so we really had to carve out a lane that put a real toll on us as humans by providing free labor and just to do it for our people. So I just want to thank you for that work and tell you that you're seen and you're not alone, but also thank you for verbalizing that it's something that we've got to change,
Yeah.
right? And just our own experience here at Marijuana Justice is why we decided to form an actual organization to do this work, to make it a formalized piece, right? And I think that's also what you did out in Colorado as well.
Mhm.
Please share with us a little bit about what your work is with Expunge Colorado.
Yeah, in this process and this uh, quest to find folks that were doing stuff, I was calling everybody all over the country, and Adam Vine from Cage Free took my call, and I was like, "What's going on?" Blah blah blah, blah, just ranting and raving. I've been obsessed about this for a minute. And he called me back and told me about National Expungement Week and how that was the first year, and it was something. I didn't know what to do. I still wasn't quite engaged with policy at that point. I still didn't know how to change laws, and I didn't understand a whole lot of the process. So I knew that this was something that I could do that would, cause immediate change, really help folks. And so that clinic started, and it was a rush. We were just like, wow. I mean, it was only 8 people, but we were like, wow, we just changed those 8 people's lives. And it's myself, Abby Moffett, and Melanie Rose Rogers did it again the next year, and it was 50 people. And the next year it was 85. And it just, and we anticipate this year to be our largest. But we finally, we were part of a National Expungement Week for a few years, and then just decided to apply for our own nonprofit status because people were reaching out right after the clinic. I missed the clinic. What do I do? And we're like, well, eventually we want to get to a point where we can take people, excuse me, on an ongoing basis,
Yeah.
and get funding, because we were volunteering for 4 years, and again, taking our time, and our, this is the first year that we've actually been able to like plan a little bit, and not sacrifice our lives. We were literally sacrificing our lives for months.
Yeah.
So yeah, we applied for that and our 501(c)(3, and we received it, and we this year received our first grant, and so excited about that. And we were part of a coalition that helped pass the Clean Slate Bill. And a lot of our feedback was so important because we were, the only entity that was actually sealing records, and that actually, you know, we're looking at the different types of records. Does this match this? And what's going on? So we had some really valuable feedback, and we were able to add some important language to the municipal piece.
Mhm.
Our attorney Abby Moffett did that because of our hands-on experience, and so it's been a wild ride, and we're looking real forward to our clinic in a few weeks. It's such a rush to get it going and to actually execute it. The lawyers are always so pumped afterwards because they know, they're like, oh my gosh, that was on there since the 90s, and that person said they didn't get jobs because of it. In one instance, we had a petitioner who didn't get an organ transplant because of a minor drug charge. So literally, like, changing lives. Uh, so yeah, Expunge Colorado has been it's fun, and it's a wild ride, and now we're hoping next year to just make expungement, topic for everyone. What's eligible? What's not eligible? How do you do it? Where, just want to get out in the community and really train people. We can't, unfortunately, do clinics all the time, and eventually when we'll be able to maybe take cases on an ongoing basis. But in the meantime, we got to educate the community on what this means, what's eligible, what's not, teach people how to read these records, and teach people how to file these petitions. And that's a big goal of ours in the coming year.
That's right. Well, I just again, congratulations on all of your work. And I like to also tell people you're not just changing one person's life, you're changing their family's life.
Absolutely.
Um, because we're all pouring in and supporting in our family. So that right there, those are communities that you all are really changing and touching. and setting a model for the rest of us, right, of what we need to focus on and make sure that we don't leave behind. Clean slate is something that has also touched Virginia and had helped really push our automatic sealing of records. That was a historic bill here in Virginia that was passed in 2021. So the ripple effect is everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, so I know too, I mean, I think that this is really amazing that you are now also working in your home state with some really interesting topic that I'm still learning so much about. And this is something that now when I talk to other folks in the legalization regulation space, I just ask them about just to see if they know about it, if they're working on it, or if this is a larger conversation that we all need to have. So I would love to hear about the work that you're doing in New Mexico too.
Yeah, thank you. That one, yeah, start talking about New Mexico, and it's such a heartfelt topic, because it really, really could change the whole state if it's not thoughtful, if it's not done right.
Yeah.
And I think it already is. Um, yeah, so the Cannabis Regulation Act initially, and still actually the final bill, had no equity mention, measures, anything. They put that in the rules and regulations, but we all know if it's not in the bill, there's nothing enforcing it. There's no, there's not much you can do to ensure that it's actually happening. So
Mhm.
initially that was my thought, and I did, I reached out to some partners and friends out there saying, hey, and I don't know what's going on with the water. I don't know how much it takes. I'm not in the space. I kind of have removed myself from the cannabis industry. I'd like to help frame some recommendations for equity, but that's not my strength. There's other people that can actually help businesses a lot better. But there's I don't know how much water this takes. It's worth looking at. And so in that process, these folks were looking at this bill, and they were like, it came out that there was already medical operators that were stealing water, misusing water, misappropriating, abusing essentially these community members, threatening, driving across federal tribal lands, like just a slew of stuff that just started coming out. And that came out because of a published white paper called High and Dry, written by some now dear friends of mine. Because they were concerned. They were like, this medical industry is already hurting us. We don't see any benefit whatsoever, because obviously at that point, tax revenue and none of this stuff was a consideration. And that's something that we really need to like build in all these new states as they're coming in, Mississippi, in this medical program. Like, make sure there's equity from day one. We don't wait till it's wreck. You gotta make sure that these communities are benefiting. So long story short, that group realized that there's some major issues around water, and New Mexico is extremely unique in the fact that there's these land grants and senior water rights holders from pre-1908. People have been there for a really long time, and those farmers and those individuals are being curtailed for their water use right now during extreme drought,
Mm.
once every 3 weeks. So they're not able to produce crops. Or else they're being paid to not use their water for this year. And in the
Wow.
meantime, there is unlimited cannabis licenses that were just, approved in this wonderful bill that's supposed to, repair the harms from the drug war.
Mhm.
But there's not unlimited water. And, if local farmers are curtailed right now from their use, yet cannabis operators are allowed to get unlimited licenses as long as they can purchase that water from folks that maybe can't use theirs. And or yeah.
So let's
And
let's stop right there because let's just make sure folks are following right now. So there's a drought. We know that in general, climate change is happening.
mhm,
New Mexico passes this cannabis bill.
mhm.
There's these unlimited licenses. And then now here comes a problem that you mentioned that there is not unlimited water, and there are already growers and farmers that are unable to use their water because of the drought. But yet somehow now cannabis growers or operators um, now kind of have like a little open season if they can afford it, it sounds like.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. And we organized hard to point this out, and in kind of saying the state's choosing winners and losers. There's not you don't make as much money off of alfalfa and off of agricultural crops as you do cannabis. So it appears that the state has chosen to prioritize cannabis production over food production, and
Wow.
the most impoverished state in the country. And many families in these rural communities have land and water. That's the only thing.
That's all they have, right?
That's it. Yeah. And so if this bill would have been done for New Mexicans, by New Mexicans, instead of by the industry, we would have had such a strong, smart opportunity to really build up New Mexico in a way that it was desperately needed.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, it's just been set up by the same way it is in most states for corporate cannabis to just come in and take what they need.
Right, right. Can you break it down for a little bit? You said some families they might only have water and land. So,
Mhm.
how does that water or land possibly get taken or used by the cannabis industry? What kind of happens there?
Well, as I mentioned, in the Middle Rio Grande, farmers are restricted to every 3 weeks, which you can't grow a crop. So if you can't use your water, you lose it. So there's that. If you don't use it, you lose it. Um, so you use it for every 3 weeks. You can't really produce a viable crop at that point.
Right.
But you are still recharging the aquifer. So there is still absolute need for this type of farming because the
Sure.
water it's a flood irrigation and it goes down and it recharges the aquifer. Um, but if you can't grow anything and you're just flooding your field for the sake of flooding your field, you could sell your water rights and you could sell them to somebody who can afford them. And they will probably pay way less than the people even realize it's worth, which is something that we'd love to get out and educate the community. And like, okay, maybe there's a way that locals with water rights that can afford the $500,000 to start in the industry to benefit from this industry is maybe leasing water or doing something and asking a high price because these guys are going to pay it because they need it.
Right.
So essentially it's you know farmers and folks are ending up selling their water rights and or their land because they can't do anything with it. And of
Mm,
course, families don't necessarily want to stay in rural New Mexico anymore. I mean, there's a lot of problems in rural New Mexico. It's one of the most underserved areas in the country. There's not mental health services, healthcare. It's a really uh, unserved and divested communities. I mean, throughout the entire state. And so this should have really worked for them, but I personally don't think it does.
wow. And that is not a conversation that is happening here in Virginia, but so, do you think would you tell someone that wasn't in New Mexico that they should start looking at their water and cannabis growing and working on looking at water rights?
Yeah, water rights and existing agricultural communities, they should really be consulted when these bills are being written. Like, how is this going to impact their industry? And will
Mhm.
it? In a state where there's limited water, it's going to absolutely impact other industries.
Yeah,
Maybe not in places where there's abundant water, but that still doesn't mean that these rural communities are going to benefit. And that's
right.
something else that was really interesting when we look at like, okay, this cannabis tax revenue goes to municipalities and counties. What about unincorporated areas that are not named or labeled next to these municipalities and counties? How do they get money? How are they going to benefit? Because if not, they're the ones that are actually hosting some of these producers because they have the water and the land. And so if it's not written in a way to make sure that every single community that has been harmed or that is feeling the impact benefits, then they end up just getting further exploited. And so that's something we're going to look at this next session is to say, like, how do we make sure these rural communities get money? And the way that it appears is that every single county is going to have an ordinance written that says that names and labels every single unincorporated area within their jurisdiction and ensures that they get X amount, but nobody's going to do that. And maybe there's another way, but from the looks of it, rural communities will not get the benefit of cannabis tax revenue, but they will have the most harm.
Wow. Wow. So, this is very alarming, and my question is almost scary. But take us 5 years, 10 years in the future, what the impact of this will have on New Mexico.
Oh man, I'm not going to use my words, but if you don't mind, um, I just saw this morning, and so I'm gonna uh, pull
Look
it
it
to you.
up.
But there was a Psyche Association, the Mexico Psyche Association was the partner that really made change with the law to actually acknowledge these land grant communities that I talked about, to acknowledge the water rights holders, acequia communities. The acequias are the water channels that run and that provide for flood irrigation. But they did and I think I'll send it to you guys. But they did kind of a summary of saying like this is what it could have looked like, and this is what it's probably going to look like. And it was extremely alarming. It's like if we would have thought about equity and funded local small farmers and supported, our existing agricultural communities and created a kind of biodynamic process where we have cannabis and food and all of this stuff, we could have some thriving communities, and our traditional rural communities could have been rebuilt. The way that it's written, and the way that it could very well play out, which don't want to think like that, is that it's just going to it's going to gentrify these rural communities, and it's going to extrapolate, exploit, and completely change um, the dynamics of a state that has just communally shared water, shared resources, and a state that needs it so desperately. So yeah, if there's not some kind of at some point saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't limit unlimited licenses in a state that has all of the water already accounted for, because that means somebody's going to lose. Somebody's already going to lose, and who's that going to be? The locals.
Yeah.
Um, and that's an important conversation. I hear advocates talking throughout the country saying unlimited licenses is the only way we can ensure equity. And but you got to look at it on a state by state basis. If there's no water, then there's water equity issues now. Um,
Yeah.
and granted, we want our people to enter, but if they're not prioritized, unlimited licenses don't mean anything.
Right.
Actually,
Right. The access to the opportunity is not outweighing just the environmental fact that everyone's got to have water.
yeah.
And this is the gap of, just someone that we are in the South, and yes, Virginia is the South. But these are the conversations, y'all, as folks in different parts of the West and the South. Like, this is why we have to be part of the larger federal conversation, because many of these things that we've heard Rosalie talk about, I don't necessarily hear in these larger conversations and the national pieces. And so this is why we've got to just continue to talk to each other and learn from one another, and again teach each other in our communities and these legislators, because they are always going to be the last ones to hear anything. And I think it's really on us to make sure that we're continuing to bring up the gaps that are in decrim, that are in legalization, and those gaps that will ultimately impact those who are already struggling with the drug war. Yeah. Wow. You know,
I'll touch really quick on the energy piece too, which is, I was listening to a committee hearing in New Mexico, and one of the legislators was like, this industry doesn't use that much water. I mean, and they're saying that right now. They're not saying that in the context of unlimited licenses forever. What we really need to be worried about is the energy piece. And again, nobody's addressing that, and there's not that. But we working on a contract with the city of Albuquerque, we're really looking at the energy impacts. And of course, you're talking about production and manufacturing facilities that are typically in industrial low-income areas, consuming high amounts of energy, increasing like the heat temperature just in those hoods alone, which there's already been kind of initial studies in Albuquerque about that, and how like lower income communities are hotter.
yep.
And so, if you're perpetuating these problems by having unlimited licenses again of everything, in areas that are already kind of struggling with so many things. And, maybe in the city of Albuquerque, they're not looking at water the same way that some of these, mutual domestics are in some of these smaller water systems, but they should be looking at energy. And like these, there's a lot of corporate social responsibility and environmental stuff being had through the cannabis space. But my qualm with that is the companies that are talking about that are the same companies that are influencing legislation to actually create that. And that's, yeah, so that's where, like, okay, you're making yourself sound real good after the fact, but we could be building in a heck of a lot more environmental conscious practices and stuff that doesn't necessarily require high energy products, outdoor grows. We need to work on smaller outdoor grows more and doing some other stuff. So, these companies that are talking about all of this stewardship that after the fact, when they're actually making the rules,
Yeah.
it's frustrating.
I mean, Rosalie, that is the beast. That is what happens with I think throughout the cannabis industry is the folks that are saying that they can promise here in Virginia us equity later, promise us incubators. Absolutely, were the ones that had an opportunity to write those in initially in the bill, and they didn't.
Yes.
You know, and you were the ones proposing these things.
Mhm.
So, anyone that is listening across other states that hear this, that to don't put your trust into those folks that have the ear of everyone else, and make sure that folks are listening to us as well.
Absolutely.
You've talked a lot about your work in Colorado and in New Mexico, and you're still working really hard in both. And I know you said that this has been a really hard journey for you, and it just is in this industry. I think any type of fighting injustice is hard work. But what are some victories that you have felt throughout your Colorado work and your New Mexico work?
Excuse me. Well, Expunge Colorado is a huge victory. The fact that we got our first 2 grants this year, and now we're like, okay, let's work our way to a couple more and let's do that. So that's been super, super satisfying. And you find the right people to work with, and you got your crew. You stick with it, and you trust each other, and you go through hard times, and you make a lot of mistakes, but you still support each other. So Expunge Colorado, I think, is super proud of it, and we're just going to get bigger and better at this point.
Yeah.
So I'm super proud of that. And then in the New Mexico piece was, working with, my people and folks from back home, even though I'm not living there right now. I go often, but that was really cool because we, last session, when we worked together with the first session, we got the water right verification requirement written into law. Last year, they tried to take it out again. And we activated and organized so fast and so fierce that we had 20 organizations in a couple of days sign on to a letter saying, do not remove this verification water rights. And I think we had like 31,000 letters sent to legislators in a matter of just a couple of days, and the bill died. And so we caused the Cannabis Regulation Act, I believe, the first time to die on the floor. But the governor was determined, and she called a special session and legalized it in a day, a couple weeks later. It was bound. Yeah, it was bound to happen.
Virginia.
We thought we had it, but no, she called a special session. She really wants to diversify the economy with out-of-state funds.
Well, I still really appreciate you framing your victories about the community response, about your organizing responses, right? Like the people's wins and not just the policy ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are 2 highlights.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit in your description of what just happened with the latest bill. I guess my question, after us watching here in Virginia, we repealed the prohibition of simple possession in 2021, and we were hoping to really get regulation this past year, but instead they did not pass regulation, and they actually recriminalized a misdemeanor of possession. So it took us backwards. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about the landscape in Colorado and New Mexico of do you feel like you all are going forward, or do you feel like you're fighting the heavy resistance?
I think, well, here in Colorado, there's definitely been some stuff that's been great. They decriminalized psilocybin. My girlfriend was a part of that a couple years ago, and there was no limit on the amount. It was just it's decriminalized possession and cultivation, personal use, production and possession. I think we're decriminalized within Denver. With no limit, which I thought was really cool. And they tried to make a measure like that this past session that didn't get on the ballot for this session. Again, just decriminalizing. So there's a lot more talk, I think, here a little bit with that. And I think a lot, some progress is being made. Yeah, but in New Mexico, you got those limits, and that's exactly what you're dealing with. It's like, okay, you can have this much, but not this much.
Right.
You can have two charges, but not four charges. I mean, you start getting it's so nuanced and it's petty, and it really just kind of um, messes with people on a, like, do we have to weigh what we're carrying around? What about the youth? Are we decriminalizing for the youth? And I know you were dealing with that too. And that was something we were hoping that the city of Albuquerque would do, is you have to create ordinances again. You have to put it in language. You have to make sure
Yeah.
that it's written down to say, this is what this means. And we got to stop with this limits thing, and saying 1 ounce is okay, but 2 ounces is not okay. 3 ounces is not
Right.
okay.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, New Mexico, in my opinion, is always kind of, a little bit backwards. It's a state that you have a lot of struggles, and so it's never going to be quite as provocative as it needs to be, really, to address the issues. But I think the conversations are better here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Or more positive.
Well, whether the state landscape wants to go forward or not, I know you and yours will be. What type of campaigns? You mentioned a little bit of what you're working on, but what campaigns are you all following or organizing moving forward?
The water right verification requirement is on the table again. It's gonna be on the table until they take it off. Like, they're not gonna stop. And right now, what's happening with that is they're gonna turn the people against each other, saying this requirement is limiting you from benefiting to this industry. This is going to stop you. And so now we're going to have some farmers against farmers. We're going to have locals really just not understanding the implications of this. So we're going to work on that, and it's like my public declaration now. Like, that's like, yeah, we're going to make sure that we fight for that water right verification requirement, because water is precious.
Yeah.
Water's life, and if we don't protect it, and if we don't have some kind of data, and we don't have some kind of processes around this, it's going to really choke people out, like, literally, and that's what we're really afraid of. So in New Mexico, we're going to work on keeping that, and work. I hope to kind of address this cannabis reinvestment, that it gets to the people and to the communities that most need it. I think there's something that's being proposed by DPA, but I don't know if it goes strong enough, because they don't really consult with the individuals and the communities that they're impacted. And then, of course, Expunge Colorado, we did just pass SB 99 this past session, and we really want to get some education around that, so people know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, working on legislative campaigns, is hard. It's hard, and you got to put a lot of time, but we got to do it.
Well, you are doing it, and
Mhm.
we thank you for that. And if there's ever anything you need us to share or push, we are still always learning and watching. So please let us know, and let us know how to continue to follow you and continue to support what you're doing.
I usually keep my head down, and and I'm not super vocal about what I do. So thank you for this opportunity. It gives me a space and the time to really share,
Yeah.
because it is it's not being discussed the way that I think it needs to be discussed going forward. So thank you again for that. So yeah, I'm New Mexico Cannabis Justice Project is kind of where some of the stuff is. It's a Facebook and Instagram, but that's really actually kind of a local New Mexico coalition, where we spread a lot of information kind of locally. But eventually, I'll definitely share some of the stuff outside the network to make sure that it's getting addressed. And Expunge Colorado is our other site that talks about our clinic that's coming up. I'm Granola Chola, La Granola Chola. I'm the hippie chola from Burke. So that's my Instagram, but there's not a whole lot of stuff. I share stuff, but I try to keep that space a little bit light and just a little bit,
Yeah.
fun, because if not, it gets heavy.
It does. It does get heavy.
Mhm.
And anyone watching or listening, we will be sharing those platforms. And again, if you are subscribed to our website and our email, we will continue to share anything that we know about what's going on, including this episode. So we are really appreciative for you coming on, taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know as advocates, organizers, we are also supposed to be like PR for ourselves.
Serious.
So we appreciate the time, and we understand it is so important. So thank you again for joining us. And is there anything else you want to say to folks before we let you go?
I think the only thing I want to say is that writing rules and laws is not as hard as they'd like to make us think. We just got to get together, put our brains together, put it down. What do we want? What are local conditions? What happens, and get it in the right hands. So, and and pass it to people who can change it back to the colonizer language, but we can write the rules. We can write the laws. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a politician, a legislator. We just got to get together and put our heads together and say, how does this benefit me? And so I just encourage that. I encourage folks to think about that, and to just keep pushing.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that, Rosalie. I think that's something that we're always telling folks. What do you want? It can be put into language.
Yeah.
They put whatever they want into
Yeah,
policy.
totally. Yeah.
We can do it too. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much, and we will be in touch.
Appreciate you, Justin.
All right, peace.
Bye.